Have you ever done everything right and still ended up as the one left out? I was standing outside the celebration, like a stranger at someone else's party. This isn't a story about a wedding. It's a story about a family that had a habit of taking one person for granted, and how that person, quietly, calmly, decided they were done being taken. I didn't make a scene. I didn't send an angry message. I didn't confront anyone in front of a crowd. I made one phone call to my ex and her husband, and everything changed after that. Stay with me, because what happened in the weeks after that call is something I never expected either. My name is Daniel. I'm 34 years old. I work in financial planning. I've never been the loud one, never the dramatic one, never the one who walked into a room and immediately became the center of it. That was always my sister, Claire. Claire is 3 years younger than me. She has the kind of personality that pulls people toward her like gravity. She laughs loudly and genuinely. She makes friends within minutes. She cries at the right moments during movies and somehow never looks bad doing it. I love her. I want to be clear about that before I go any further. This story is not about hating my sister, but love doesn't make you blind to what's happening. And what was happening, slowly, quietly, for years, was that being Claire's older brother had quietly become a job I never applied for, a job that didn't come with any agreement about what I'd receive in return. Our parents, my mother Greta and my father Thomas, are good people in the way that most people are good. They mean well in the general sense. They don't want bad things to happen. They wouldn't describe themselves as unfair. But sometimes the most painful patterns aren't built by people who are trying to hurt you. They're built by people who simply stop noticing that one person in the room is carrying more than their share. My parents stopped noticing a long time ago, or maybe they noticed and decided it was just the natural order of things. Daniel is responsible. Daniel is capable. Daniel will figure it out. Claire needs more support right now. Claire is going through something. Claire deserves this. Those were the unspoken rules of our family for as long as I can remember. When I was 16 and saving money from my part-time job, I was praised for being mature. When Claire was 16 and spent her allowance in one weekend, my parents refilled it without a word. When I got into university and needed help with the application fees, I was told to look into scholarships. When Claire applied to the same university 2 years later, my parents took out a small loan to cover her first year without being asked. I didn't resent it then. I told myself it was just how families worked. Different people needed different things. I was the older one. I could manage. I always managed. After university, I built a career that I'm genuinely proud of. It took years of careful, patient work. I earned certifications. I built a small client base. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment that I could actually afford without asking anyone for anything. Claire, meanwhile, drifted through a few different jobs and eventually landed in event management, which honestly suited her completely. She's brilliant at it. She can walk into a space, imagine what it needs to become, and make it happen. She has an eye for detail and a warmth that makes clients trust her immediately. Around the time I turned 30, Claire started dating a man named Edouard. He's French. His family owns a vineyard in the Loire Valley. He's charming in the effortless way that certain people just are. I liked him, genuinely. He seemed to genuinely love Claire, and Claire was clearly happier than she'd ever been. So when the engagement happened, I was happy for her. I meant it completely. What I didn't expect was what came next. The wedding planning started about 18 months before the actual date. From the very beginning, it was clear that this was going to be an event on a scale that our family had never experienced before. Edouard's family was contributing a significant amount. The vineyard itself was going to be the venue. There would be guests from 2 countries. Catering, florals, music, transportation, all of it was being handled at a level that I quietly recognized was beyond what my parents had access to. My mother called me about 3 weeks into the planning process. She was excited. She was also nervous. She said, "Daniel, you know how important this is to your sister, and you know how much we want to be part of it the right way." I said, "Of course, Mom. What do you need?" And there it was, the question I always asked, the question that had somehow become the engine of our family's financial decisions. She told me they wanted to contribute £20,000 toward the wedding. They wanted to help cover the costs for the UK side of the family to travel to France, flights, a block of hotel rooms, the rehearsal dinner contribution. £20,000. My parents had savings, but not that kind of savings. Not anymore. Did I think I was the right person to quietly make up the gap between what they wanted to do and what they could actually afford? That was the question I had never let myself properly ask before, and it was starting to feel like I needed an answer. Over the following months, I contributed £12,000 in total. I framed it to myself as a gift to my sister. I told myself I was doing it because I wanted to, not because I felt I had to. But there's a difference between what you tell yourself and what you actually feel at 3 in the morning when you're lying in the dark running numbers. And what I actually felt, beneath the stories I told myself, was that no one had asked me if I was okay. No one had asked me what this cost me. No one had said, "Daniel, are you sure? Is this manageable for you? What can we do to help you in return?" There was just a quiet assumption. Daniel will cover it. Daniel always covers it. Daniel is fine. About 4 months before the wedding, I was visiting my parents for a weekend. We were having dinner. My father was talking about the logistics of the trip to France, who was driving to the airport, which family friends were coming, whether my Aunt Margaret would need a ground floor hotel room because of her knees. It was a warm, comfortable conversation, the kind of dinner where everyone is looking forward to something together. And then my father said something that stopped me cold. He said, "We've also told Claire that whatever she needs from us in the next year after the wedding, we're there. They want to look at property in the UK. Edward's firm might move him here part-time, and we want to help them get settled properly. You know how important first homes are." He said it casually, the way you say something you assume everyone already knows, the way you say something you don't think requires any particular reaction. I nodded. I said, "That's lovely." And then I excused myself to use the bathroom, and I stood in the hallway for a moment with my hand against the wall. Because what I had just heard was this. My parents, who had just accepted £12,000 from me to contribute to my sister's wedding, were already planning their next financial commitment to her future. And I was not part of that future. I was the source of the resources that funded it. Is this what I am to them? That was the first question. Have I always been this? That was the second. Did they ever sit in a room and talk about what Daniel might need? That was the third. And the most difficult one, the one I had to sit with for days afterward, have I done this to myself by never saying anything? That last question didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like an observation. And observations are useful things. They show you what's real. The weeks before the wedding were busy. There were logistics to coordinate. I was the one who confirmed the hotel block bookings. I was the one who liaised with the transport company about the airport transfers. I was the one Claire called when she was stressed about the seating chart and needed someone calm to talk to. I was there. I was always there. And I kept noticing things, small things, a second red flag, if you want to call it that. When we were all on a family video call about 3 weeks before the wedding, Claire mentioned very casually that she and Edward had already been looking at a 3-bedroom house in Surrey. She said, "Mom and Dad have said they'll help with the deposit when the time comes. Isn't that amazing?" My mother beamed, my father nodded, and no one looked at me. No one said, "We couldn't have gotten here without Daniel's contribution." No one said, "Daniel, we want to make sure we do the same for you one day." It wasn't there. The acknowledgement wasn't there, and a small, quiet part of me registered that absence without being dramatic about it. I just noted it, the way you note a hairline crack in a wall that you'll need to deal with eventually. Then there was the moment a week before we flew out. My mother rang me. She said, "Daniel, I know this is last minute, but your Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia are finding the travel costs really difficult this month. Could you possibly cover their flights? It's only about £600 for the pair of them, and they're so important to your father." £600 after 12,000. She said, "Only." I took a breath. I said, "Let me think about it." She said, "Of course, but if you could let me know by tomorrow, that would be helpful for the booking." I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after she hung up, and I asked myself the question I had been putting off for months. What am I actually doing here? Not in a dramatic way, not in an angry way, in the plainest, most honest way I could manage. What am I doing? What is the pattern I'm participating in? And what happens if I simply, quietly stop? I didn't cover the flights. That was the first time in my adult life that I said very calmly by text message, "I'm afraid I can't manage it this time. I hope Robert and Patricia find a solution." My mother didn't respond for 2 days. When she did, she said, "Of course, we'll sort it." No argument, no scene, no real acknowledgement, just a moving on. And I noticed that too. The wedding itself was genuinely beautiful. The vineyard was extraordinary, rows of vines catching the late afternoon light, the old stone building draped in white flowers, the sound of a string quartet drifting across the terrace. Claire was radiant. Edward looked at her the way everyone hopes someone will look at them one day. I cried a little during the ceremony, which surprised me, because whatever complicated feelings were moving through me about my family, my love for my sister was simple and true. She deserved this, and it was a magnificent day. The reception went long into the evening. Wine from the third red flag arrived not at the wedding, but the morning after. We were having a relaxed family breakfast in the hotel dining room. The immediate family, my parents, me, Edouard's parents and sister, a few cousins. It was a warm, unhurried morning, and then my father said, again casually, the way he said everything that landed like a weight, "Edouard, we've been so proud to welcome you into our family, and we want you and Claire to know that we'll always be there, whatever you need as you build your life together. That's what family is." Edouard thanked him warmly. Claire squeezed my father's hand. My mother wiped her eyes. It was a lovely moment, a genuinely lovely moment. And I sat there with a cup of coffee and thought, no one in this room has said that to me. Not once. Not in the past year. Not in the past 10 years. Not, "We'll always be there, Daniel, whatever you need." Not once. I had been the one who was always there, for them, and the assumption, never spoken, always present, was that I didn't need anyone to be there for me, because I was capable, because I always managed, because that was who Daniel was. We flew home 4 days later, and for the first 2 weeks after the wedding, life went on normally. I went to work, I went to the gym, I had dinner with friends. I did not call my parents more or less than usual. I was fine, in the way you say you're fine when you're not, but in the way where you've made a decision and you're living quietly inside it. The decision was this: I was going to stop. Not dramatically, not in a way that required a confrontation or a speech or anyone understanding what I was doing. I was going to stop being the financial cushion that my family reached for whenever they needed one, and I was going to start building something for myself, properly, seriously, without always mentally subtracting what other people needed from what I had. But something else was coming that I hadn't planned for, something that required a different kind of response. About a month after the wedding, my mother called me. She said, "Daniel, I want to talk to you about something important." Her voice had a specific quality to it, not anxious, more careful, the way someone sounds when they've rehearsed what they're going to say. She told me that she and my father had been doing some thinking about the future. They were getting older. The house they lived in was larger than they needed now. They had been considering downsizing, selling the family home, moving into something smaller, and using some of the proceeds to help Claire and Edouard with their property deposit. She wanted me to know because it affected me too. There had been an understanding, she said, though she did not say when this understanding had been established or with whom, that she and her father had always planned to leave the house equally to both children. If they sold it now and redirected a significant portion of the equity to Claire, that understanding would change. She said, "We hope you'll understand, Daniel. Claire and Edouard are just starting out, and you've always been so independent. We thought you, of all people, would see why this makes sense." I let the silence hold for a moment, a long moment, and then I said, "I appreciate you telling me, Mom. Let me think about it." She sounded relieved, like she'd expected more, like she'd been prepared for something harder. She said, "You're such a good son, Daniel. You always think things through." I said goodbye, and I put the phone down, and I sat there with this specific feeling of someone who has just been handed a bill for a meal they never ordered. Was I surprised? Not entirely. Was I hurt? Yes, more than I expected to be. Not about the money. Not really. What hurt was the framing. You've always been so independent, as if independence was something I was born with, as if it hadn't been built out of years of being the one who got less without anyone acknowledging it, as if my self-sufficiency was a personality trait and not a response to the way my family had consistently arranged things. I sat with that for a long time, and I found myself thinking about someone I hadn't thought about in months. Her name was Sophie, my ex. Sophie and I dated for 2 years in my late 20s. It ended well, as these things sometimes do, because we both realized we wanted different things at different times. She met someone the year after we broke up, a man named Marcus. They got married about 2 years ago. I went to their wedding. There were no bad feelings. Sophie is one of those rare people who remains a genuine friend after a relationship, because the foundation was always real, even when the romance wasn't quite right. Marcus works in property law. He specializes in estate planning and inheritance disputes. And I had his card in my phone because at some point Sophie had said, "If you ever need someone you can actually trust for the legal side of things, Marcus is the best I know." I had never needed it. Until now. Not in the way you might think, not to fight anyone, not to threaten anyone, but because I needed someone who could tell me clearly and honestly what my rights were, what my options were, and what the smartest, most adult response to this situation looked like. I called Sophie first. Nothing dramatic, nothing hostile, just a series of quiet adult decisions. I want to describe what Marcus suggested, because this is important. First, I should formally document the contributions I had already made, not to demand repayment, but to have a clear, accurate record. Second, I should consult with an independent financial advisor about my own estate planning and ensure that any family financial arrangements going forward were documented in writing rather than understood verbally. Third, if my parents wanted to proceed with selling the house and redirecting equity to Claire, that was their right, but I should quietly, clearly, and without drama, make it known that I would be treating my own financial future as a separate matter, and that any future requests for contributions from me would need to be considered in that new light. Fourth, and this one required the most courage, I should have a direct conversation with my parents, not a confrontational one, not one where I listed grievances, but a calm, honest conversation in which I said plainly what I needed them to understand. Marcus said, "The goal isn't to change what they decide. The goal is to stop operating in a system where your generosity is treated as infrastructure." That phrase, treated as infrastructure, I wrote it down because it was the most accurate description I had ever heard of what my role in my family had been. I took 2 weeks before I called my parents, 2 weeks of preparation, 2 weeks of getting my own affairs genuinely, properly in order. I met with my own financial advisor, someone completely separate, someone with no connection to my family, and we reviewed everything: my savings, my pension, my professional trajectory, and what emerged from those conversations was something I hadn't let myself fully see before. I was in a genuinely strong position, not because of anything my family had given me, but because of 12 years of quiet, disciplined work that I had done entirely on my own. I had built something real, and I had been so focused on what I'd contributed to other people that I had never fully stood inside what I'd built for myself. That was a revelation, not a loud one, a quiet one, the kind that changes how you hold your shoulders when you walk into a room. I went to my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon in early autumn. The garden was just starting to turn. There was tea on the table. It felt like every other Sunday I had visited, but it wasn't every other Sunday. We sat down. My mother asked about work. My father mentioned that the boiler had been making a noise. And then I said, "I wanted to talk to you both about something important." They looked at each other briefly. My mother said, "Of course, darling." I had prepared what I wanted to say. I had not prepared a speech. I had prepared honesty. I said, "Over the past several years, I've been glad to support this family in the ways I have. Contributing to Claire's wedding meant a lot to me because Claire means a lot to me. But I want to be honest with you now because I think we've been operating on some assumptions that I should have spoken about sooner." My father set down his cup. My mother was very still. I continued, "I think there's been an assumption in our family that because I manage well, I don't need anything, that I don't need acknowledgement or consideration, or the same kind of thoughtfulness that goes into decisions about Claire's future. And I want to tell you, clearly and without any anger, that that assumption isn't accurate, and I'm not able to keep operating inside it." The silence lasted perhaps 10 seconds. It felt longer. My father said, "What do you mean, Daniel?" I said, "I mean that going forward, I won't be able to contribute financially to the family in the ways I have. Not because I've failed, but because I've realized I need to invest in my own future with the same energy I've invested in everyone else's. I also want you to know that I understand if you choose to redirect the house equity to Claire. That's your decision to make. I won't be upset about it, but I want it to be a conscious choice that you're making with full awareness that it changes the arrangement we always had. And I want it in writing, not because I don't trust you, but because I think clarity is better for everyone." My mother's eyes filled. My father looked at the table. And then something happened that I hadn't expected. My father looked up and he said, "You're right." Just those 2 words, "You are right." My mother said, "Daniel, have we really made you feel this way? For this long?" I said, "I don't need you to feel terrible about it. I just need you to know it's true." And
"You should have been able to tell me." I said, "I probably should have, but I didn't know how to say it without it sounding like I begrudged you anything. I don't. I never did." She said, "You're a better brother than I deserved." I said, "Let's just be better going forward." She laughed a little, the way Claire laughs when she's moved but doesn't want to cry. And then she said, "Also, can you please tell me what Marcus told me? Because I think we need an actual family conversation with someone like him." I said, "I'll send you his details." In the months that followed, several things happened. My parents consulted with a solicitor. A proper documented plan was put in place, one that was transparent, balanced, and fair to both children. It wasn't exactly equal, because life isn't always exactly equal, but it was honest. It was discussed rather than assumed. And for the first time, I felt like I was part of a family conversation rather than a family resource. I also did something I had been quietly putting off for years. I bought myself a flat. Nothing flashy, a two-bedroom place in a part of the city I'd always liked, with good light and a small balcony and a kitchen that I filled with things I chose for myself. I had the money. I had always had the money. I had just been spending it on other people's milestones instead of my own. And standing in that empty flat the first evening, with a glass of wine and the city going quiet outside the window, I felt something that took me a moment to name. Not pride exactly, something gentler than pride. Like the satisfaction of finally arriving somewhere you should have let yourself go a long time ago. Marcus and Sophie came over for dinner a few weeks after I moved in. We sat around a table I'd assembled myself, very badly, I should add, because furniture assembly is not among my many capabilities, and ate a meal I'd cooked with varying degrees of success. At some point, Sophie said, "So, how do you feel? Really?" I thought about it. I said, "I feel like myself," which sounds like it should be easy, but apparently required quite a bit of effort. Marcus laughed. He said, "Most of the people I work with spend years in situations that don't serve them, because making a change requires being honest, and being honest is hard." I said, "What made it easier was that I didn't need anyone to feel terrible. I just needed to tell the truth and let the truth do what it does." He raised his glass. He said, "That's actually the most sophisticated legal strategy there is." Sophie said, "He says that to everyone." I laughed. And sitting there in my own flat, on my wonky table, with two people who had no obligation to be in my life but chose to be, I felt something shift. The way weight shifts when you finally put something down that you've been carrying for so long you'd forgotten it was there. I want to say something clearly before I get to the end of this story. This is not a story about being a victim. I made choices. I said yes when I could have said no. I prioritized other people's comfort over my own honesty. And in doing so, I participated in a dynamic that wasn't good for anyone, including my family. Because when you allow people to take you for granted, you're not actually protecting them. You're preventing them from growing. You're preventing them from seeing you clearly. You're making it easier for them to stay in a pattern that, sooner or later, was always going to crack. The call to Sophie was the beginning of something, not because she or Marcus gave me the answer, but because reaching out to people I trusted outside the situation helped me see it clearly for the first time. Sometimes you need someone outside the house to show you what the walls look like. There's something I've come to believe about families. The ones that function well aren't the ones without tension or imbalance. They're the ones where when someone finally tells the truth, the others are willing to hear it. My family isn't perfect. No family is. But in that Sunday afternoon conversation, something became possible that had never been possible before. Not because I performed my frustration, not because I cataloged every injustice, but because I told the truth calmly and gave everyone in that room the chance to do something with it. Some people hear the truth and get defensive. Some people hear it and dismiss it. But some people, the people worth holding on to, hear it and say, "You're right. Let's be better." My parents said that. My sister said that. And that meant everything. If you're carrying something in your own family, a pattern you've been in so long you don't remember signing up for it, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to say that telling the truth doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be an explosion. It doesn't have to cost you the relationships that matter. Sometimes the